All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back and very excited to see you here today for day two. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you if you'd like to ask questions of our participants and our panelists, take a look over there to your right at the Q&A tab. That's where you'll want to do it. The general chat is a great place to talk, but they won't be able to see everything as it tends to stream by quickly. So click on the Q&A tab to type in questions for the participants. And now, without further ado, we're very excited to present to you a gas tax increase 25 years in the making. How Missouri got it done in 2021. And I'm going to turn you over to Rich Giuliano, ARTBA's General Counsel, who will be moderating this session. Rich, take it away.
Well, thanks, Matt. I am back now to moderate another session. Yesterday, we talked about some recent developments in the states that were positive. This morning, we're going to talk about a very positive development, as was mentioned in the title, something that's gone on for a long time that really just finally came to fruition, I think, yesterday, as they will tell us, as our leaders will tell us. But, I've had the chance to visit Missouri many times, both on personal trips and on behalf of ARTBA. And unfortunately, over the years, the theme has been just this continued frustration with trying to make some major steps forward in terms of revenue, some attempts, legislative initiatives, voter initiatives, all kinds of other things that we'll talk about here over the next hour. But unfortunately, nothing accomplished until this year, finally. And it's certainly worth celebrating, and we're going to talk about it in some detail. So we have two great panelists. We've already got a question, so we'll get to that in a little bit from Kevin in Wisconsin. But we have two great panelists here who are going to give you some great inside information on how this all worked. First is State Representative Becky Ruth from Missouri, the 114th district, legislative district, Republican, first elected in 2014. So she chairs the Transportation Committee and co-chairs the Transportation Oversight Committee. She's a retired high school teacher, which, as we know, is good training for being in the legislature. Probably nothing better than that. Also works as a real estate agent, lives with her family in Festus. Is that the right pronunciation? Festus, Missouri. She is in Jefferson County. Okay, in Jefferson County, which is south of St. Louis area. So we're glad to have her here. Obviously, one of the major players in what happened. Len Tenges is here. To most of us, he needs no introduction. His, a legend in his spare time, but he is the president of the AGC of Missouri. They have been an ARTBA chapter since 2008. Back at that time, AGC of St. Louis, which Len was heading, and HCA of Kansas City both joined up as ARTBA chapters in Missouri 13 years ago. Then a few years after that, the St. Louis group merged with the former AGC of Missouri to become a new AGC of Missouri. And Len has been the president and CEO of that group ever since. He is very active, among other groups, with the American Society of Association Executives, helping to run the Certified Association Executive Program, which some of us have been fortunate to get that certification through the years. He's authored construction textbooks. He's been a leader of many groups in Missouri and St. Louis, including the Workforce Development Board, which is of great importance to all of us to that issue. And he is a great fan of the St. Louis Cardinals, as we were just talking about earlier, as we always do, and has hosted me and many of our industry people at Cardinals games through the years. So that's always a lot of fun. So we have a festive atmosphere here today, but let's talk first about what led up to this year's accomplishment. I'm going to ask the representative first, and then Len, to talk a little bit about, I mentioned earlier kind of the years of frustration, and if you could go back to maybe the last time you had a major revenue increase, which I know is several years ago, and go through some of the things maybe that didn't work up until now, and some of the challenges that were so difficult to surmount, and we'll take it from there. So, Representative, we'll start with you. Please give us some insight.
Sure. So several years ago, we did do a bridge bonding bill, which, thanks to an infra grant, and our legislature taking money from general revenue and actually investing into our roads and bridges. It's called the 251 Bridge Project, focus on bridges. And to date, we've been able to do well over 100 of those 251 most neediest bridges in our state. So that was the last time we really had been able to do anything with transportation funding. But again, that was only on bridges. The last time that we had a fuel tax increase was 1996. So we have basically been living on a 25-year-old budget in our state. Unfortunately, we've tried several measures, a sales tax. We had Proposition D a couple of years ago. Both of those failed. So it was really up to us to try to figure out how we could bring something new and innovative to the plate that we felt like we could get across. So it was definitely a struggle, and pretty excited that the governor signed Senate Bill 262 yesterday to increase our gas tax.
Len, if you could, Len, if you want to go ahead. Are you still, you're still with us. Okay, great. And if you could talk a little bit, maybe in a little bit more detail about some of the previous initiatives that were unsuccessful, that would be great.
Yeah, my wife always kids me that I've worn out 4 vehicles driving back and forth to the state capitol to try to get the roads fixed. We, as Representative Ruth mentioned, we had a sales tax on the ballot a few years ago, which failed, got tangled up with a lot of other issues. To go way back, a number of years ago, one of the legislators, Mel Hancock, promoted the Hancock Amendment, which required any increase to general revenue over a certain percentage would have to go to a public vote. And for years, folks have used that as a crutch, I would say, to say, well, we can't do anything because it'll exceed the Hancock Amendment. And I think it came out during the debate on the floor this year that, in fact, the Hancock Amendment applies to general revenue, but because of the structure of transportation funding in Missouri, it's walled off. The fuel tax is walled off from GR. It goes into the highway, a state highway trust fund. So, in essence, I think that I think there are many of us who believe that the Hancock Amendment does not apply to transportation funding. However, folks I don't know want to get too far into that discussion, but to get something through that was palatable to everyone, we needed to address that issue. And also, as Representative Ruth mentioned, we had Proposition D, which was a graduated increase in the fuel tax on the ballot 2 or 3 years ago. Spent a lot of funds on. I think the campaign was probably a little bit north of $6 million, which probably doesn't sound like a lot to the people in California, but sounds like a lot to us here in Missouri. And we narrowly lost in the general election. There was 1.1 million votes in favor and 1.2 million votes against. And quite frankly, I think politically it got caught up in the Claire McCaskill versus Josh Hawley race for the United States Senate when President Trump came in and did some aggressive campaigning for Senator Hawley to help get him across the finish line. It changed the dynamic of the voter. We were ahead in the polls up until 3 weeks before the election. And then as those of us who have been involved in a number of these elections, it ain't over till it's over, Rich, you know, for a good baseball quote for you there. This is, as Representative Ruth said, this is a breakthrough moment after 25 years. It's just been tremendous to, our folks are elated right now. So that's the history.
Mention when you do voter referenda, you're subject to the politics of the moment that could be unrelated to what you're trying to do, and you know, perhaps it's either becomes misrepresented or kind of lost and everything else going on, and the big money being spent by candidates these days statewide too. So
yeah,
totally understandable.
That was a sidebar issue. We had a great grassroots campaign. One of the things that, I guess, to go back into past history, probably one of the best things we did was one of our prior commissioners for the Highway Commission, Steve Miller, encouraged us to form a local citizens group, the Missourians for Transportation Infrastructure. And that's a citizens-based group that includes not just construction interests, but public transit, chambers, community groups, so that we didn't just have a campaign committee, but we've had this. And I think TIAC had a session on this a couple of years ago that I stole ideas from, of putting these citizens groups together that really helped us fill up the Capitol with interested people on a regular basis to help Representative Ruth get her message out.
Right. Great. Well, let's go back to the representative then. So we've had this, you know, several unsuccessful initiatives through the years. So if you could kind of set the table for us in the last couple of years, and obviously this is during your term, you're now in Jeff City in the legislature and in your leadership position, working with your colleagues, and a little bit about how this came about here over the last several months, please.
So when I became chairman of the House Transportation Committee about 3 years ago, I knew that it was going to be a tough task moving forward, because when you hear the word tax in any form, even though this truly is a user fee, that's something that just sets people off, and absolutely the first response that you tend to get. So I started digging in, going to as many different transportation conferences as I could to learn what other states were doing. And one such conference in Atlanta, where I had the pleasure of meeting Senator Green, went around the table and talked about what our states were currently doing. Senator Grooms talked about the South Carolina model that they had developed and successfully passed their gas tax. I listened to it. They actually did an income tax credit. And theirs is only for South Carolinians. So we had to be very careful when we came to Missouri, trying to look at what would be the Hancock Amendment because of the Interstate Commerce Clause. But I really felt like this was a program that we could tweak and make it work for Missouri. So that was kind of the first spark, was that initial transportation share conference. Brought it back the first year or so, as I was kind of floating it out to leadership and my colleagues, started getting met with some resistance. That Prop D had just failed. Everybody was pointing to that, saying, look, the people don't want this. But really, honestly, Prop D had some issues with it, in the sense that it was tangled up with other issues. It was kind of a Hail Mary thrown onto a piece of legislation dealing with Olympic gold medals, to get it there and out to the folks to vote on. And it had to also deal with funding of highway patrol and so forth. So I think people were a little confused, weren't very trustworthy with the language, with how Prop D was done. And as you said, we're kind of at the mercy to politics, whatever's going on at the time. But you're also, when you're doing something like that, you're at the mercy as to how that language is written and when it goes on the ballot. So I knew this was going to be a challenge. Worked on it for about 1.5 years. I think finally all of the elements were in place. Governor came in And that's been one of his strong messages, has been infrastructure, investing in our roads and bridges. So we had a governor that was willing to back us on this, a lieutenant governor that was willing to back us. We had Senator Schatz, the president pro tem of the Missouri Senate. All of the elements really kind of fell into place for this to happen this year. We knew it was going to be an uphill climb because many of my colleagues still didn't like the idea of a fuel tax or increasing the fuel tax in any way, shape, or form. But at the end of the day, it was pretty exciting that the vote came out the way it did in the House with 104 votes, 58 of those being Republican. It was a long time coming. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into this. The Missourians for Transportation Infrastructure, AGC, lots of groups, ACEC, the truckers. It took a whole coalition of people to get behind this and work on the issue to finally get it across the finish line, and really to educate my colleagues as to how this worked. With the novel approach that Missouri took by offering a refund on that new user fee, on that new fuel tax, and trying to simplify that process. We already have the ag fuel rebate, so we already have a system in place for that. Now it's expanding it to this new fuel tax. I think that really gave people a comfort level to see that, all right, if you want to invest in our roads and bridges and our infrastructure, you won't get the refund, leave your money where it is. However, if this is something you wholeheartedly disagree with, you can get 100% of that new fuel tax back. It's a simple form to fill out with the Department of Revenue. Save your receipts. You do not have to turn in your receipts, actually. You just have to have them in case you're audited. And that record of those receipts could also be an electronic record. So it could be something as simple as snapping a picture of the receipt at the gas tank. Turn those to the Department of Revenue. Within 45 days, the Department of Revenue must issue you a refund, and that is a check back to the individuals. It's not through income taxes. It is an actual check, and if they don't issue that refund within 45 days, then they're actually going to have to pay the individual interest at the federal interest rate. So I really think that this idea came out as a win-win for everyone.
I'll ask right now. So we had a question from our colleagues in Wisconsin. Does the rebate apply to out-of-staters?
Yes. Again, because of the Interstate Commerce Clause, we could not restrict this to Missourians only.
Interesting. Can you just tell us a little bit about the basics then of what the increase is, when it applies, and so forth? The basic provisions of the bill.
Yes, it's a 2.5-cent increase over 5 years for a total of 12.5 cents. It will go into effect this year in October of 2021. In addition to the fuel tax increase in Senate Bill 262, we also felt the need to look ahead, to look to our future. It does increase the electrical vehicle decal fee. In addition, we are forming an electrical vehicle task force to start looking at the future impact of electrical vehicles on our funding mechanism, how that's going to impact our road and bridges, and just what that overall infrastructure is going to look like in the future. So we're looking at coming up with this funding mechanism for today, but also planning for tomorrow.
Again, we have a question here. We'll just ask it now since we were talking about the rebates. What are the administrative costs associated with that from your revenue department? What do you expect to see that?
So the administrative costs, the fiscal note that we got on that, we don't feel it was very accurate. I know we challenged the fiscal note on a couple of different occasions and they had to rewrite it. Every time you create a new program, they want to throw in extra FTE, extra costs to kind of help out their departments. So we're still working through that. But the cost really should be pretty minimal. Like I said, we already have the agricultural fuel rebate available. They're already used to doing that. The bill also allows for those fuel rebates for agriculture to be filed electronically as well. So through the electronic use, and people that don't want to do it electronically can still do it, through snail mail, through paper. But really the cost should be less just because they already have a program in place. So it's just expanding the program that they already have to include the new fuel tax.
Here. The effect of the rebate was basically to draw in some more support, maybe from the conservative side, perhaps, to say, look, there's this option for this rebate. We're not going to, people have the option, whatever. I mean, how did you see that as being part of the equation here?
Sure, as Lynn said earlier, 1.1 million people voted in favor of Prop D, 1.2 million voted against. So for those 1.2 million who don't like the idea of taxes and they want to get their money back, they'll be able to. I think it's a good balance. It's a good option for those people. We are expecting anywhere from 15 to 25% on the rebates, on the refund.
I think it's a great idea. It reminds me of when you get a rebate form if you buy something, an appliance or something like that. And I always figure that a certain number of people are going to lose it or not going to send it in or whatever. And that's always part of it as well. So let me turn back to Lynn then and ask you, after these unsuccessful attempts that we've talked about, when did it become apparent to you that this was going to be different? I mean, I know you had a governor who was very interested. I was at your December meeting a couple years ago, and the lieutenant governor was there and pledged to make some progress. And you had representatives like or leaders like Representative Ruth and others as part of the team here. But when did it look like this was all really going to come together finally this time?
Well, I think Representative Ruth used the term comfort level. And I think there was a certain balance between comfort level and discomfort level. Our folks, when this idea came through about the Carolina model and the potential rebate idea, I think at first, the talk in the legislature was, well, that's great. Let's get something passed, and then we can get it on the ballot again. And I think the industry groups, especially with leadership, we had the conversations like, look, the folks who normally would support a campaign like that have campaign fatigue, and we need to find a better way. We need to find a way for the legislature to fill that leadership role. And I just can't say enough good stuff about the governor, Representative Ruth, Senator Schatz, who listened. That was when I think we felt it was different. Was that, hey, they got it. They got it that this was something that couldn't be another campaign. It had to be something that the legislature took action on. The Lieutenant Governor, Mike Kehoe, was a big behind-the-scenes worker to help bring Democrats and Republicans together to help those folks who are the no tax under any circumstance type of people to understand that this sweetener of this rebate could help speak to that issue. And everybody in leadership held the line that this should be done legislatively and not be done as a ballot campaign. So with having the citizens group put in place, with having the acceptance of that from the legislative leaders, and having our folks really engaged in making those legislative visits and talking to their, we filled the House gallery one day with a couple hundred craft workers. It looked like Orange and Yellow Vest Day in the House chamber. That our folks were all over the place to help send that message that this was important. That's when I think we felt it was different. And And it did turn out different.
We have a question here, Len. I'll throw this one to you if you want. What was the reaction from the fuel suppliers, so the petroleum marketers, and those folks who are the point of taxation for the fuel tax? And I guess if you could answer that, and then just more generally, maybe some of your allies in this effort who were, part of the group, the citizens group you mentioned, or maybe some, if you had any non-traditional allies that were supportive of this, if you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, I think, to go back to the petroleum marketers, I think they, somewhere during the session, they sent out like a 3 or 4 page letter to all the legislators about how they thought the increase was too high and it shouldn't be this much. And they weren't crazy about it, but in the end, I think the tide, the tsunami of people who were for it, sort of washed over that. I think that it's been so long since anything's been done. Since it has been 25 years, I think folks did understand the need. I think we got the transit people to support this. And like you said, we went around and got a lot of local chambers because the cities and counties get part of the proceeds from this. I think it's either 10 or 15% of the revenues from this go to cities and counties. So those sort of folks came on board. Not a whole lot of non-traditional folks. Just I think there are enough transportation supporters as part of this that we got the message through.
We go back to the representative, and let me ask you, obviously this was years in the making, even particularly in recent years. So then we have the pandemic and the, chaos, I guess, or however you want to describe it, relating to that, and all the other different things you had to look at in the legislature relating to the economy and COVID aid and so forth. So how did that make this more challenging to try to steer this through, that you were having to do this during the pandemic? And I would ask you to all, there's sort of the policy part of it in terms of revenue and so forth, the fiscal situation with the state, but any practical issues. I mean, we had some folks on yesterday who were talking about having to do all this by Zoom instead of face-to-face conversations that they would normally have on big legislation. So kind of your impressions of trying to do this in a pandemic.
So in Missouri, we've been pretty fortunate. We did miss about a week of session earlier this year. We were all out for about a week due to some cases of COVID, but otherwise we were actually in person. Some of the challenges we had were with our committee hearings, needing to allow for virtual testimony, things like that, and not all of our were set up for that virtual Zoom testimony. However, when it came to this issue, people showed they came and testified, and those that couldn't testify sent in their testimony. So there was a link where you could go on to the bill site and actually submit written testimony. I had a bunch of testimony that I had asked for it to be sent to me via email, because not everybody necessarily sees that testimony on that link. So I wanted to make sure my transportation committee member actually had all of that testimony. We had a record amount, over 80 people testify in favor, and no one testify in opposition. One person for informational purposes only. This passed unanimously out of my committee also, and made it to the floor. So in Missouri, we were very fortunate. We didn't have a lot of those types of challenges that maybe other states did, but we did miss about a week, which put us a little bit further behind legislatively. I'd also like to throw in there too, when Lynn um, that was important that came out and worked on this bill too. We have a lot of rural Missouri and really needed to get that message out to rural Missouri, to those farmers, how important this was in order to get their product to market, how important the roads were for them. And really, I think once that kind of light bulb went off, that helped them to see why this made such a difference. Because now you're talking about their constituents, even for some of them that are farmers themselves, whether they're cattle ranchers or soybean growers. I mean, the ag groups really came out very strong for us, and they helped quite a bit.
Rich, that was really an oversight on my part. You know, the cattlemen got on board. You know, the Soybean Association was there yesterday at the bill signing. Another thing I think that helped us with this was the image of MoDOT, that the DOT over the last several years under Director McKenna has done a tremendous job of, you know, they're squeezing the nickel until the Indians riding a buffalo right now. I mean, they have really done a tremendous job of, with the dwindling resources, of doing their level best to go after every, you know, they got an infra grant to do some additional work in the state. You know, the governor took some money out of GR to help fund this bridge program and some other things. So they have, you know, the image, I think, and probably Representative Ruth could speak better to this than I can, but my impression is that in prior years, the legislature had somewhat of a jaded view of MoDOT. And when we would go to try to promote for a fuel tax increase or something, we'd get the pushback, well, MoDOT's got plenty of money. They don't need any more money. They got plenty of money over there. And we didn't hear that this time. I think the image of MoDOT really helped us as all these groups trying to move the issue forward.
Yeah,
Also,
Representative, you have a comment on that part of it?
yes, I'd like to point out a couple of things that MoDOT has done to help improve that image is their 5-year plan. Back in 2010, they initiated a 5-year plan, which really gives that commission the opportunity to plan out 5 years to approve projects on the STIP. It gives the legislators a chance to really look at those projects and to see that MoDOT has been following that plan, really not veering off the course and doing what they say that they're going to do. I think they've become more transparent. That was one of the things that came up in the arguments on the House floor was transparency, wanting audits of MoDOT. MoDOT already performs an outside audit by a company every single year. The results of that audit, how they're funding things, you can find all of that now on the MoDOT website. So I think MoDOT has improved their image in their 5-year plan and also becoming more transparent. So it makes it easier for people to look at what projects are going on and what was this financial audit, what was the result of it, and giving a great financial snapshot of MoDOT and how they're spending the money.
To Director McKenna when he was in New Hampshire in his previous assignment, and I remember he came to one of our ARTBA regional meetings, which was in Kansas City. Gosh, the week that he started, or something like that, at MoDOT. So it's great to hear that all this progress has been made in the years since then. Len, I'll give you another question that's we have in the box here about the coalition. Who took the lead in establishing it? You know, a little bit more detail about putting that together a few years back.
Sure. What happened was Steve Miller, who was the chair of the Highway and Transportation Commission at that time, held about 3 or 4 organizational meetings. He invited different construction associations. Representative Ruth mentioned agriculture, engineering folks, some chamber folks. We had maybe 3 or 4 meetings at the headquarters for MoDOT. to pull this all together, and looked at what some other states were doing for their models, set up a dues structure, a website, hired a consultant, put some money in place that we could retain a consultant to operate the thing. And so there were 5 groups that were the founding members. AGC of Missouri was one of those 5 founding members. So I don't know if this is, I guess that gave me a permanent seat on the board. So it's been good to see that, but we have a good consultant that's been doing this, set up a website, went out and recruited new members. We're talking maybe a couple $100,000 a year for a budget for this thing. But it's we developed some policy statements. Pre-COVID, we had a conference. Last year, we did not have a conference. But I think it's a case of everybody checking their ego at the door and saying, this is not about taking credit for something. This is about getting something done. And I think to his credit, former Commissioner Miller sold everybody on that. And it took somebody, quite frankly, it took somebody who was outside of any individual association to be the catalyst to make that happen. It took somebody like Commissioner Miller to say, okay, this is good for everybody. Let's all get together. Let's all. And it's not just associations. Individuals can join. Chambers can join. We've expanded the board to include more folks. So if you go on the Missourians for Transportation Infrastructure website, our Missourians for Transportation Investment, if you go on the website for mfti.org, all the information is there, the platforms. While this was going on, they were able to put out a blast email and a lot of social media like, hey, even if you're not a member, do you support Senate Bill 262? Yes or no? Sign on to this list. And so we had hundreds of grocery stores, trucking companies, like all the different folks who would sign on to support the bill. So we were able to utilize that vehicle, so it didn't have to be a member of a trade association to jump on board with this thing. So the question, and I think the point of this was, too often we would fall in the trap of whenever there was something on the ballot, we'd form a campaign committee, we'd collect a bunch of money, then once the campaign was over, everybody would go back home and wait for the next thing to come. This provides that continuity of effort, provides that connection, because I know you're going to talk about what's coming next, and we all need to be prepared for what's coming next. And we can't just keep this sawtooth type direction. We've got to have some continuity.
Representative, did you see that as effective to have those different voices as part of the coalition? Did that help with your colleagues and help kind of support what you were trying to accomplish?
Absolutely. The coalition was kind of across the board, broad spectrum, dealt with a lot of different industries, a lot of different businesses, but it was everybody that was really invested in getting this to the finish line. So by having that broad coalition, they were able to speak to a whole variety of legislators about those issues that were important to them, to their industry, how this would impact those different legislative districts. So having that coalition was absolutely key to this. There were times where it was that smaller group to lead and then bring in the broader group as necessary, kind of be the communication for that broader group. So we kind of had that inner circle that was able then to take that meet and take that message out to the broader circle. And I think that was just very, very effective. And if I can stray just 1 second, because I'd also like to put in this point, Lynn mentioned, the truckers. The truckers are not eligible for the refund. The refund is for 26,000 pounds or less. However, knowing that, the Trucking Association still got behind this bill. They saw how important this is. And if you look at how the trucking industry has to pay their taxes, having actually a higher fuel tax in Missouri is helpful to them with how they pay their taxes, as I understand it. Some of them where they pay it quarterly and they could end up owing $30,000, $40,000 if they purchase their fuel in Missouri, but then travel through other states, like going to the East Coast and so forth. At the end of a quarter, they were owing a lot of money. And then it also gave them an incentive to purchase fuel elsewhere because of those taxes. Now it not only is helping them, but it also gives them a larger incentive to actually purchase their fuel here. And so while they're not eligible for the refund, they were extremely helpful and a good part of that coalition, because that was a question a lot of the legislators came up with was, well, how does this help trucking industry? So it was really awesome to have them part of that coalition and out there working and talking to people and really educating people as to how the trucking industry works.
Because they always need to be addressed in whatever state we're talking about, around the federal level, dealing with the truckers and trying to figure out where they are on this. Let me stay with you to ask, so the fuel tax is part of this, and the electric vehicle fee you talked about. Did you consider any other forms of revenue in putting this together? We've heard of states kind of going in some different directions here with some different possibilities. But were there any other options that you might have thought about that you decided not to include in this package?
I wanted to keep this. It was my way to keep this as streamlined as possible, not get into the weeds. I know a lot of other states put together big omnibus bills and just included everything they could possibly think of to get passed at once. I knew that wasn't going to work for our legislature. Keeping the focus on this picture, being more streamlined, more direct, was able to really get our points across better and not get mixed in the weeds with 1,000 other things. So that's why we just stayed focused on the fuel tax, and then also, there's a huge demand for addressing the electric vehicles. So those were the two issues, and really didn't want to get it mixed up with too many other things.
Hey, Rich, I also to augment that, we mentioned things that failed. Amendment 7, which was the sales tax, was divided up about 15 different ways between all the different sources who were going to get it. Proposition D, as Representative Ruth mentioned, got tied up with some taxing on gold medals for Special Olympics people and funding for the highway patrol. So the message on this bill was keep it simple, keep it clean, keep it straightforward. I think we threaded the needle on this one.
Please continue to send your questions. We've gotten some of them here in the Q&A. We've been asked to reiterate again about applying for the rebate. So sorry to ask this again, but Representative, as I recall from earlier in the hour, so it's just a matter of filling out a form. It can be done electronically, or I guess a paper form. Keep your receipts, keep your gas receipts in case there's an audit. And it has to be rebated in 45 days, correct?
Is correct. They'll be able to apply for the refund the following year between July and September. So those are the months that they can apply for. So you'll just need to fill out the form with obviously your personal information, where you purchased the gas, how much you purchased, how much the tax was, all of that information, so they will have that. Again, we tried to streamline the process, make it as easy as we could for people. We're hoping in the future, depending upon what happens with the Department of Revenue, as they're trying to update their systems. Can't promise anything, but one of the things we've talked about is really kind of an upload link to be able to electronically just upload all of that, and it'll go into the system and file that refund for you. That's years in the making yet, and it's just going to depend on the funding for Department of Revenue. But I know that's the direction the department would like to move in, again, to make it as easy as possible. For those people who don't like to use the electronic, they still like to use the paper copy. I do myself sometimes. They have that option as well.
Rich, one of the things we had thought about as the coalition was actually for the people who thought this was too complicated, we were going to go around the legislature and hand everybody a Ziploc bag with our, with our logo on it. If this was too complicated, I think a Ziploc bag would take care of it.
Excellent. Well, as we get into the final portion of our hour together here, we want to talk about the future, where this leads, and somebody's already anticipated that with a question. So I'll ask about I'll ask this question: the future outlook for the state's transportation fund. So does this meet the needs, or is it go part of the way to meeting the needs? How would you characterize it? We'll start. I'd like both of you to talk about it. But Representative, you could kind of start out by answering that question. What exactly has been accomplished here with this bill?
With this bill, by the time it's fully, looking at somewhere around $500 million new revenue coming in per year. However, we're already behind the 8 ball in Missouri, so this is going a long ways to meet that need. But I believe the number, and I'm hoping I get this right, and maybe Lynn, you can chime in. MoDOT is kind of behind about 800 million a year. So the 500 million is going to go a long way to help meet those needs. There are already larger projects that MoDOT's planning out as a result of this, but there's still going to be a need. It's still going to be a challenge, but we feel very successful in being able to give a little bit more stability to the system that we have currently. As we go forward, I'm not sure what the next move, what can we do now? Kind of celebrating for today, but we're also looking, and those are future conversations to be had, is how we continue to move forward.
I'll say, as Representative Ruth mentioned, the numbers are the overall need. Basically, if you do the math, going back to 96 of the last time that the fuel tax was increased, and you do a cost of living adjustment, basically this, at the end of implementation of this gets us back to the same level of investment we had 25 years ago. So this, when you do the inflation factor and this all gets implemented, the cost of, the inflation in wages and inflation in materials, this gets us back to status quo of where we were then. So I think, yes, it goes a long way to address what we need. No doubt about that. I think also, as far as the future, I think one thing that we as a trade association and as our citizens coalition need to keep our eye on is, and I think if folks in other states get this, any efforts to unwind this, that we need to, we have to shift from offense to defense now, and keep an eye on what sort of the folks who were on the other side of the debate, what they may try to promote or introduce to try to unwind this. So we need to continue to keep our finger on the wire here and make sure that we protect this hard fought victory.
Another question, you know, we've heard some rumblings about some challenges, some political challenges to this, and what's the latest on that? And you're obviously both, I'm sure, preparing for it, but is there anything new on maybe some challenges from the right on this, or however you want to characterize it?
I'll take that to start. The latest intel I have on that is that was a lot more smoke than fire. That in fact, their Americans for Prosperity did file for an initiative petition to try to put this on the ballot, as we talked about earlier. The legislature did take the lead and make this happen. The language for the signature gathering was approved. However, the resources are not there by any means. I think we have a broad-based enough coalition that trying to get any traction on that issue, you know, you're talking a couple $1 million to go out and collect enough signatures to get this on the ballot, plus a campaign. And the resources are not there. I think it was a little bit more of a knee-jerk publicity stunt, more so than a real anything with any substance. But that said, as I said earlier, we can't ignore any threat. We've worked too hard for too long to let this slip away.
A question here about the coalition going forward. So I guess you've kind of already answered that the first priority is to play some defense here and keep and protect what you just accomplished with the coalition as needed, right?
And I also see the question about transit. I mean, this doesn't answer the whole question. This takes care of the investment. Like I said, it gets us back to where we were in '96. You still have transit, you still have ports, you still have airports, you still have all these other modes. You still are going to have to deal with the change in the type of vehicles that are on the roads. There's still a lot of work ahead. This gets us back to where we were, but the coalition, I think, will continue to look at all the different constituent needs, whether it's farm to road bridges, whether it's congestion mitigation, whether it's transit. I mean, the need is still there.
Representative, on that point, what are some of the things you're going to see coming through your committee then, maybe some of the other modes and so forth? What do you anticipate?
You know, we have to defend what we have now. I think the referendum, you know, that was kind of a futile attempt. You know, they threw that out, and quite frankly, once it got, there was only 50-something days other signatures. So really, there wasn't enough time to get. But we do have to be guarded, and we have to look ahead. Just knowing some of my colleagues, some of the things that they tried to do to block this as we went forward. You know, I think we have to be cautious of someone filing legislation to do initiative petition to send this back to the vote of the people after we've already, you know, passed this. Those are the types of things we really have to take into consideration and be mindful of as we move forward. Other things dealing with transportation that we could see coming through the committee, one of the things that I've worked very hard on is our ports. And they're really an integral part of our whole transportation system. And that comes back to this investment in roads and bridges, because that's important for them as well. But really looking at P3s, how they could be used in helping to develop our ports. We did pass a sunset extension for our AIM zone, advanced industrial manufacturing zones, this year to help our ports. That sunset now got moved from 2023 to 2030. So that's going to help with those developments. Missouri is so centrally located in terms of having both the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, the major highways, that, you know, we're really becoming this hub for infrastructure, transportation, distribution. So I think those are some of the things that we'll see going forward. larger cities, Kansas City. The transit there, public transit is important. So we'll probably see a variety of topics this next session that come through my committee.
Road usage charges or vehicle miles traveled, or however you want to describe it, and is that something that has been considered, Representative, or is that on your radar at all? It's something to look at in the future.
Some of those options have been filed in the past, and I'm sure they'll be filed again in the future. There has not been a huge appetite in the legislature to take up those issues, so we'll have to deal with those issues as they come.
Well, we're almost at the end of the hour, as is usually the case with these. We could go on much further, but let me ask both of you to wrap up. We'll start with Lynn. You know, this workshop that we do is about you know, helping all the states move forward with transportation investment. And Lynn, you've been part of this workshop many times as you've worked towards the great result that just came. But if you could just each give just a little bit of final advice for your counterparts around the country who are still moving forward on this. Couple of points of advice here at this point in time about how to try to be successful.
Well, I think, Rich, really never give up. I would say maybe the best message I could give. Sooner or later, if you continue to work it, you do get the alignment. I mean, quite frankly, this was a combination of failed ballot measures, learning from those to take a more simplified approach, having the right leadership in the House, in the Senate, in the governor's office, having the right coalition put together. So a certain amount of it is just that consistent hard work until all the pieces finally fit in place, until all the tumblers keep going. You keep spinning it back and forth until you find the right combination. But if you quit spinning it, you're not going to unlock it. So we just needed to stay at it, and I think that was the whole secret to this was don't quit.
And Representative, I'll give you the final word in that regard.
Sure, being tenacious, tenacity, as Lynn said, sticking with it, don't give up, don't take no for an answer. This workshop is great to share what is actually happening in other states. This is how we came up with it. Over the weekend, I legislative conference, and I'm on the executive committee there and sit on the transportation committee. And 2 seats down from me was Senator Grooms from South Carolina. You know, we had met a couple of years, got that idea. It was great to see him in person. We even talked about it in that committee in other states at that point, their ears perked up. And, you know, I think sometimes we can get wrapped up so much into what our state is doing and trying to show off our state that we forget to actually work together and look at what other states are doing. My background as a teacher, you know, we always stole each other's ideas. And I think that's what you have to do here is you've got to look at what's happening in other states and can I state, and don't be afraid to reach out. You know, I'm available for any other state that wants to talk more about what we did and how they could bring this model to their state and how it might impact them. Senator Grooms was great. We were able to actually speak with him several times throughout the process as we were trying to pass this bill. So I think people will find out, yes, we're willing to share, we're willing to help you. When we help you, it helps all of us. So that you are willing to do that, and as Lynn says, that tenacity, don't give up, don't take no for an answer.
Thank you. Well, we've come to the end of the hour. We want to offer our congratulations to both of you and to all your colleagues in Missouri. Great state, as I mentioned, one that I always enjoy visiting, and we'll get back to soon post-pandemic here for baseball and other things with Lynn and the gang, and looking forward to that. But thank you. It's great that you credit learning things from other states, because again, that's what this workshop's all about. And I'm sure that we're going to call on both of your experiences again and wisdom, having helped to pilot this through. So thanks a lot for your time today. Hope to see you in person soon. And we will turn it back to Matt. Thanks.
All right. Thank you again for a tremendous session. What an excellent just case study in perseverance. So yeah, go ahead and turn off your cameras and mics. We appreciate it. That was awesome. And go ahead and exit the stage. So now we break for lunch, but don't go away. Right after lunch, we have two heavy-hitting sessions, one on making road usage charge a reality with several legislators, and then, of course, our final session featuring a number of ARTBA staff having to do with the Biden administration's infrastructure plan. So we will see you promptly at 1 o'clock.